Millionaire offered a waitress $100,000 to humiliate her. What happened to her? I'll give you 100 grand if you serve me in Chinese. Sweetheart. The words sliced through the golden silence of a Manhattan restaurant, followed by laughter sharp enough to bruise. Imagine standing there, a woman once called doctor, now a waitress, holding a silver tray, trembling under the weight of humiliation. Outside, snow fell softly over the city of dreams. But inside, dignity was being auctioned off for sport. What would you have done in her place? Would you stay silent? Or stand up when the whole room watched you fall? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you about the night a waitress taught a billionaire what true power sounds like. It began with a sound no one in the prestige room expected to hear: the sharp smack of money hitting metal. $100,000 in fresh green stacks landed on Jasmine Carter's silver tray like a slap. The laughter that followed cut through the air, quick and cruel, echoing against the glass walls of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Jasmine froze. Her pulse jumped, and she felt her breath catch somewhere between her chest and throat. The tray shook slightly in her hands. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, the whispering diners, the waiters pretending to be busy, the women who hid their discomfort behind polite smiles. The air in the room grew heavy, thick enough to taste. Richard Blake leaned back in his leather chair, smug and steady, his champagne glass catching the golden light. His grin widened, like he owned not just the table, but the moment itself. I'll give you 100 grand if you serve me in Chinese. Sweetheart. His words landed harder than the money. They carried no humor, only arrogance. For a split second, Jasmine thought she had misheard. Serve him in Chinese. Her heart pounded faster. Each beat a reminder that she was still standing there, still visible. Her skin prickled with heat while the rest of her body went cold. A hush spread through the restaurant, the kind that happens when everyone knows something wrong is unfolding, but no one dares to stop it. One of the investors at Richard's table shifted uncomfortably, lowering his eyes. Another cleared his throat and said something quiet in Japanese. But Richard didn't care. He was the type of man who believed humiliation was just another form of entertainment. Jasmine managed to speak, her voice trembling but firm enough to hold dignity. Is this a joke? Sire, Richard smirked. No joke. Just a little fun. Let's see if the pretty girl can earn her tip. The laughter came again, not loud, but sharp enough to sting. She saw waiters pause mid-step, their eyes darting away. A woman at the next table pressed her napkin to her lips and looked down. Jasmine's fingers tightened on the tray until her knuckles went white. She told herself not to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Her mind raced, jumping from anger to shame to disbelief. She'd served men like him before, the kind who treated kindness like weakness, who looked at her and saw only someone beneath them. But this wasn't service. This was a spectacle. Richard lifted his glass and spoke louder, inviting the whole room into his cruelty. If she fails, she kneels. Right here, in front of everyone. The words hit her like cold water. Gasps rippled through the room. Somewhere, a fork clattered against a plate. No one moved to stop him. No one ever did. Jasmine's vision blurred for a moment. Her heart pounding so hard, she thought it might break the silence itself. Her co-worker brushed past and whispered, "Just walk away." "Jas, he's drunk." But Jasmine didn't move. She couldn't. Something inside her pride, pain, maybe both, anchored her to the floor. Richard chuckled, swirling his glass. "What's wrong?" "Sweetheart, cat got your tongue." Her hands were shaking now, but her spine stayed straight. She thought of her mother's tired eyes in the hospital bed, of the rent overdue, of the long nights spent swallowing humiliation just to keep going. $100,000 could change everything. But this wasn't about money. It was about dignity. Her throat burned, but her voice came steady. "What happens if I don't fail?" For the first time, Richard hesitated. His smirk faltered, then returned sharper. "Then I suppose you'll have earned your money." "Darling, but we both know that's not going to happen." The crowd murmured, a mix of disbelief and anticipation. Some pitied her, some wanted to see her fall. And Jasmine, her chest rising and falling too fast, realized she was done shrinking for people who mistook cruelty for power. Her chin lifted, eyes locking onto his. "Then I accept. But if I win, you apologize. To everyone." The restaurant went silent. Even the pianist at the far end stopped playing. Richard blinked, then burst out laughing. "You win. That'll be the day." The mockery rolled through the room like cheap champagne fizz. Jasmine's palms were slick with sweat, but she didn't break her gaze. Years of exhaustion, humiliation, and quiet endurance all rose inside her at once. Burning hotter than fear, Richard grinned wider, leaning back in his chair. "Fine. If you fail, you kneel. If you win, you get your miracle. Deal." Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like thunder. "Then you better watch closely." The silence that followed felt alive. The audience didn't yet know it, but they were about to witness not humiliation but history. Her nod in front of Richard wasn't born from sudden courage. It came from years of loss that stripped her down to the bone titles, savings, pride, everything but her will to keep going. To understand why she didn't flinch, you have to know where she had been before that night. 3 years earlier, Jasmine Carter woke up every morning to the sound of students outside her Harvard office. Back then, she was Dr. Carter, the linguist who made language sound like music. Her lectures filled the room, and her students loved her for how she could make difficult ideas feel human. Sometimes, she'd forget to eat dinner, too busy grading or helping a student rewrite a paper until midnight. She loved that life. It made her feel like she mattered. Then the phone rang one afternoon. It was the hospital in Boston. The nurse spoke softly, almost apologetically. "Ms. Carter, your mother's scans show a mass on the pancreas. You might want to come home." Jasmine didn't even pack properly. She drove straight to New York, repeating the nurse's words in her head until they became meaningless. At the hospital, the world changed. Beeping machines, white walls, the smell of antiseptic. Everything felt too bright and too quiet. Her mother, Angela, tried to smile when she saw her. "It's okay, baby. We'll figure it out." But Jasmine could see the fear behind her mother's calm. She held her hand and promised she wouldn't let money decide her mother's fate. She kept that promise as long as she could. She worked remote, then half-time, then none. The bills came faster than she could open them. Each envelope carried another demand she couldn't meet. She sold her car, then her furniture, then her books. One night, she came home to find her mother crying softly in the dark. "I'm sorry you have to give up so much for me." Jasmine sat beside her and said, "You gave up your whole life for me. This is nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The university sent a polite letter suggesting an extended leave for health and personal reasons. She read it 3 times before realizing it meant goodbye. The next week, she packed her office into 2 cardboard boxes and left without saying a word to anyone. She tried to stay strong for her mother, but strength costs energy she didn't always have. Some nights, she'd sit in the hospital cafeteria, staring at her reflection in the coffee's surface, wondering who she was without the title, Professor. When her mother slept, Jasmine applied for jobs, anything that paid fast. Call centers, data entry, nothing stuck. The world that once praised her degrees now acted like they didn't exist. When the last of her savings disappeared, she took the only job that said yes. Waitressing at the Prestige Room. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months. She told her mother, but months became years. She learned to balance trays with one hand and heartbreak with the other. The guests never looked twice. Some were kind, some were cruel. All were forgettable. Every night, she told herself, "It's just work. It doesn't define me." But when she hung up her apron at midnight, she felt like the walls of that restaurant were closing in. Angela's condition worsened before it got better. Some nights, she called Jasmine crying from the hospital. "I just want to go home." "Baby," Jasmine whispered back. "You will. I promise." She didn't know how, but she meant it. When rent in Queens went up, they moved to a small room in the Bronx. The window rattled in winter, the floor creaked, but it was theirs. On her first night there, Jasmine sat beside her sleeping mother, opened her old dissertation, and read the line. She once wrote, at 24, "Language is the bridge between worlds." She closed the laptop and whispered, "Then maybe words can save us too." That thought, small, fragile, but true, was the only thing she carried with her when Richard Blake threw his money on her tray 3 years later. The moment Jasmine said she accepted, a ripple passed through the room. Forks paused midair. Wine glasses hovered half-raised. Richard Blake blinked once, caught off guard, then recovered with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned back, silent for a few seconds, studying her like a man watching a puzzle he thought he'd already solved. The smirk returned, sharper now. Jasmine felt the weight of every stare pressing on her skin. Her palms were slick against the tray, the edge biting into her fingers. A drop of sweat slid down her spine, cold and unwelcome. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, steady and violent. Her mind raced between 2 impossible truths: that $100,000 could buy time for her mother, and that kneeling here would erase everything she'd ever believed about herself. For a moment, she almost backed down. Pride doesn't pay hospital bills. But then she saw Richard's grin widen, saw the way he enjoyed the tension, like it was part of the show. That small cruelty lit something inside her, a quiet, dangerous fire that whispered, "Don't give him your fear." Across the table, the 3 Asian investors shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered something in Japanese that sounded like enough, but Richard ignored them, raising his glass again, eyes fixed on Jasmine. He didn't need to say much. His silence said it all. He wanted to see her break. Jasmine's throat tightened. She looked down at the money again. Green, heavy, almost glowing under the chandelier. Each stack looked like salvation wrapped in shame. She imagined her mother's voice on the phone, weak but joking. "Maybe next month I'll cook for you again." "Baby." Jasmine swallowed hard. She couldn't lose both her mother's chance at life and her own self-respect. She set the tray on the nearest table and wiped her damp palms against her apron. The motion was small, but it steadied her. Then she looked straight at Richard. He raised an eyebrow, still wearing that lazy arrogance that came so easily to men who'd never had to beg. Her voice came low but clear. "I'll do it. I'll serve you, in Chinese. And when I finish, you'll know what respect sounds like." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She's serious." Richard chuckled softly. Not loud enough to fill the room, this time. He didn't bother replying. Instead, he took a slow sip of champagne and gestured for a waiter to bring the Chinese menu. Jasmine's hands trembled slightly when she picked the tray back up. It wasn't fear anymore. It was energy, raw and restless. She could feel her body remembering what it was like to stand in front of a class, to hold attention through nothing but words. Her co-worker brushed past her and whispered, "You don't have to prove anything to him." Jasmine nodded faintly, but inside she thought, "Yes, I do, but not for him." When the waiter brought the thick leather-bound menu, Richard didn't look at it right away. He just watched Jasmine, waiting for hesitation. She didn't give him any. As the room quieted again, she caught her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. For a heartbeat, she saw two versions of herself, the woman she used to be and the one standing there now. The past and present collided in that single image, and she realized that if she stayed silent, she'd lose them both. So she straightened her back. Her heartbeat slowed. Her fear didn't leave. It simply moved aside, making space for resolve. Richard finally broke the silence with a short laugh, tilting his glass toward her in mock salute. Jasmine barely heard him. Her focus narrowed until all she could see was the open menu waiting on the table, like a door she had once walked through and somehow forgotten how to close. The crowd leaned in, drawn to the quiet war they could feel, but not name. Jasmine adjusted her tray, her fingers no longer trembling. She whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "This time, I don't serve to please. I serve to reclaim." And with that, she took a single step closer to the table, not toward humiliation, but toward the beginning of her reckoning. The air inside the prestige room turned sharp and heavy, like everyone was holding the same breath. Jasmine stood still, one hand on the tray, the other clenched at her side. The silence was almost physical. She could feel it press against her skin. Richard's smile twitched. Impatient. He snapped his fingers once. "Bring the Chinese menu." The thick one. The waiter froze, hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Yes, sire." A few diners exchanged glances. One whispered, "This is going too far," but no one stopped it. They never did. When the menu arrived heavy, leather-bound, lined with characters like art, Richard flipped it open with a theatrical flick. "Let's see if our genius can read more than fortune cookies." The laughter that followed was quick, nervous. Even his investors didn't join in this time. Jasmine didn't answer. She took the menu gently, the cool leather brushing her fingertips. Her pulse raced, but her face stayed calm. Her palms were sweating, her breath shallow. She told herself to focus. Don't let him own the silence. She opened the first page, and for a moment, the room vanished. The black ink on the page pulled her somewhere else, back to Beijing. The memory came sharp and bright. The sound of chalk scraping across the blackboard, the air thick with steam and winter dust. Her professor pacing in front of the class, eyes fierce but kind. You want to speak Mandarin like a native, then stop memorizing. Fail it. The words, the culture, the rhythm. Language isn't knowledge, it's empathy. Jasmine remembered nodding back then, not fully understanding. Nights spent practicing tones until her throat ached. Days when every syllable sounded wrong. And then, one dawn, standing on a quiet Beijing street, hearing a fruit seller shout and realizing, for the first time, that she understood everything. That was the moment she had fallen in love with sound, not just language, but what lived behind it. Now, years later, that same energy began to return. Her breath slowed, her shoulders relaxed, her heartbeat synced with the rhythm of Mandarin, its rise and fall, its precision and grace. Across the room, she heard the soft whisper of the Chinese chef to a waiter. Even locals can't pronounce half those dishes right. His tone carried pity. But Jasmine didn't need pity. She needed purpose. She closed her eyes for a second. She pictured her mother's hand, squeezing hers before surgery. She pictured her students back at Harvard, hanging on every word. She pictured the girl she used to be, hungry, curious, alive. When she opened her eyes again, something in her gaze had changed. The trembling was gone. The fear had settled into stillness. Richard leaned forward, voice dripping with mock charm. Need help? Sweetheart. Jasmine didn't even glance at him. The menu lay open in her hands, like a test she already knew the answers to. Around here, the restaurant held its breath. The waiters stopped moving. The pianist's fingers hovered above the keys. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Jasmine inhaled deep, measured, steady, the kind of breath taken before a leap. Inside her, everything aligned: memory, grief, strength. Every loss she'd endured had led her here, to this fragile, golden silence before the storm. She lowered the menu slightly, her lips parting just enough for a whisper. Okay, Mom, watch me. Then she looked up. The room didn't know it yet. But the woman they were watching wasn't the waitress anymore. She was the storm about to speak. The silence that followed her breath was absolute. Every head in the prestige room turned toward her, as if the air itself was waiting. Jasmine lifted her eyes, the menu open in her hands. For the first time that night, she did not see Richard Blake or the investors or the glittering walls of wealth around her. She saw her younger self standing in a classroom in Beijing, trembling but brave, speaking words that would one day bring her here. Then she began. Her voice was soft at first, steady, deliberate. Mandarin rolled off her tongue like a stream finding its rhythm again after years underground. Good evening, gentlemen. Allow me to introduce tonight's selection. The words carried a melody that made the chandeliers seem to hum. The tones rose and fell with perfect precision, each syllable balanced between grace and authority. It wasn't a recital. It was a conversation with the world. The first dish, she said in fluent Mandarin, is mapo tofu. She described it as if she were painting the aroma of fermented beans, the sharp scent of Sichuan pepper, the dance of fire and numbness known as mala. Her voice deepened, taking on warmth. This dish represents balance. The spice teaches humility. The heat teaches patience. It reminds us that true flavor is born in contrast. The investors leaned forward, their eyes widening. Yuki Sato's lips parted slightly, disbelief flickering across his face. She wasn't just fluent, she was precise. Putik, alive. Hiroshi's hands, once folded nervously, now rested still, his expression softening into quiet awe. Richard tried to laugh, but it came out thin. He turned to the others. She memorized that. It's rehearsed. But no one answered. They were listening. Jasmine continued, moving to the next dish with the rhythm of a storyteller who knew her craft. Our second course is Peking duck. Her pronunciation shifted effortlessly into the formal Beijing dialect, her tones clipped and elegant. The duck skin, she explained, represents the patience of generations. The golden crisp achieved only through 24 hours of careful marination. Her voice softened. To eat this dish is to taste time itself. The restaurant was utterly still. A fork dropped somewhere in the back, and the sound seemed to echo. The pianist had forgotten to breathe. Even the waiters stood frozen, drawn in by something they couldn't name. Richard's smirk faded completely. He leaned forward now, his brow furrowed, as if he was trying to find the trick. But Jasmine was only getting started. She turned the page and spoke again, this time with a subtle change in tone. The third dish is xiaolongbao, the delicate soup dumplings of Shanghai, each with 18 folds that symbolize prosperity. Her hands moved slightly as she spoke, as if she could feel the texture of the dough. The broth inside melts into liquid gold, created from gelatinized marrow that transforms under steam. Yuki whispered, "Her Mandarin is perfect, beyond perfect." She's using academic phrasing. Richard's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but Jasmine spoke over him, her voice unwavering. This dish teaches that beauty comes from precision. That mastery is not arrogance, but devotion. Her words struck him harder than any insult. She looked up then, straight into his eyes, her calm, unbroken. "You offered me $100,000 to prove your power, but tonight, I will remind you what real power sounds like." Her switch into Cantonese was seamless, her accent shifting to a warm, rolling rhythm. "In Hong Kong," she said, "the same dish carries another story. It honors the patience of women who wrapped dreams in dough while waiting for sons to return from sea." Her tone held both history and heartbreak. In that moment, even those who didn't understand the words could feel the weight behind them. Richard's hands trembled slightly. His wine glass tilted, the liquid trembling like his confidence. He whispered to no one, "What the hell is happening?" Jasmine did not stop. Her transitions flowed like water across stone. Now, in Taiwanese Mandarin, soft and melodic, she described a festival dessert made with sweet rice and red beans. "Ach ingredient," she said, symbolized resilience, unity, and renewal. The words wrapped around the room like light. By then, the investors were no longer just impressed. They were moved. Hiroshi's eyes glistened. He murmured, "This woman carries the spirit of 1,000 years of language." Yuki nodded, his voice low. "She's teaching us more than food. She's teaching dignity." Jasmine's heart pounded. But it was not fear. It was release. Each word carried pieces of her journey, every night of study, every moment of loss, every humiliation she had endured to stand here. Now, the power that once belonged to Richard's stage had shifted entirely to her. Richard leaned back. "Bal," he muttered. "This is a setup. She's acting." Jasmine turned to him, her voice firm but calm. "You think knowledge is an act. That humility is weakness. But what you see as performance is my truth. What you call luck is years of labor you never had to do. Her words struck the air like thunder in a church. Someone gasped. A woman at a nearby table whispered, "God bless her." Jasmine turned back to the menu and spoke again, switching once more to Mandarin. "Our final dish," she said softly, "is longevity noodles, long and unbroken, cooked with care to symbolize endurance. In my culture, we believe the length of the noodle mirrors the length of one's life." Her voice lowered, trembling slightly now with emotion. "Some of us learn endurance not from comfort, but from surviving those who mock us." When she finished, the silence lasted long enough for everyone to hear their own heartbeat. Richard stared at her like he was seeing a ghost, the ghost of the respect he'd never earned. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then, the first clap broke the silence. One, then another, then dutzends more. Applause spread across the restaurant like a wave. The sound filled the golden room, warm and unstoppable. People stood. Some were wiping tears. The pianist covered his mouth, eyes glistening. Jasmine didn't bow. She didn't smile. She just lowered the menu and let the sound wash over her. Her heart was steady, her breathing calm. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a server, not as a failure, but as a human being standing in her own light. Richard finally spoke, his voice small, broken. "Who are you?" Jasmine met his gaze, her tone clear. "I am Dr. Jasmine Carter, and tonight, I am exactly where I belong." The applause thundered louder, shaking the crystal glasses. Richard sat frozen, his power unraveling in real time. Around him, the men he wanted to impress were staring not at him, but at her. He had turned the spotlight into a mirror, and it showed him everything he was not. By the time the applause faded, everyone knew they had witnessed something far greater than a challenge. They had seen a woman rise from the ruins of humiliation and rebuild her dignity. Word by word, Richard Blake, for the first time in his life, understood silence. Not the silence of control, but the silence of awe. The applause still echoed through the golden hall when Jasmine finally spoke again. Her voice, calm and steady, carried through the silence like a soft bell after thunder. The audience leaned closer, sensing something more was coming, something beyond language, beyond performance. She looked at Richard, whose smirk had long disappeared. His face was pale, the arrogance drained from it. He stared at her as if he had seen a ghost wearing the face of the woman he tried to humiliate. Jasmine took a small breath and said quietly, "I suppose it's time you knew who I really am." Her words rippled through the room. The laughter, the murmurs, the whispers all died at once. Every head turned toward her. "My name is Dr. Jasmine Carter. I'm a linguist, Harvard graduate, former professor of computational linguistics. I speak 9 languages, and before I ever carried a tray, I taught world leaders how to speak with dignity." No one moved. It was as if the entire room forgot how to breathe. Richard blinked rapidly, shaking his head in disbelief. A waitress, a doctor. It didn't fit the story he had written in his mind. The investors exchanged glances, stunned, their earlier discomfort replaced by reverence. Jasmine continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I once stood behind glass booths at the United Nations. I taught diplomats that words can build bridges or destroy them. But 3 years ago, my mother fell ill, cancer, and I sold everything to keep her alive. The room stayed silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Richard swallowed hard. His Adam's apple, bobbing like guilt, caught in his throat. Jasmine looked at him, her tone calm. Not cruel. So yes, I clean tables now. I carry trays. I take orders. Because my mother's life was worth more than any title. A woman in the corner gasped softly. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "God bless you, child." The sound broke something in the room. Several guests wiped their eyes. Even the staff who had worked beside Jasmine every night stood straighter, pride blooming quietly behind their tears. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked smaller now, not because of the suit or the setting, but because his certainty had crumbled. Jasmine watched him for a long moment, then slowly turned to the tray, still holding the money. $100,000. The same bills that had fallen like insults now lay before her as if waiting for redemption. She rested her hand gently on them, then pushed the tray toward him. "Keep it," she said softly. "Or better yet, donate it. There's a scholarship fund for young linguists at Columbia. Maybe the next girl who loves words won't have to trade her education for survival." Her words were not angry. They were pure, simple, and devastating. The kind of forgiveness that doesn't excuse cruelty, but transforms it. Richard's eyes glistened. He looked at the tray, then at her, and something inside him broke. Slowly, painfully. He stood and lowered his head. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped his lips. Jasmine didn't move. She just nodded once, her gaze steady, her posture unshaken. "Not to me," she said quietly. "To everyone you've ever made feel small for not having what you were born with." Richard turned toward the crowd, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. For all of it." The words hung heavy, real, and in that moment, the audience, the wealthy, the servers, the strangers, all saw something they hadn't expected to witness in a room like this. Grace. Then came the applause. Not polite, not hesitant, but thunderous. A storm of hands rising in recognition of something deeper than victory. It was the sound of dignity restored, of justice without vengeance. Jasmine stood still, her face illuminated by the golden light above. The applause wasn't for brilliance or fluency. It was for courage, for choosing compassion over revenge, for showing that power built on cruelty collapses, but power built on truth endures. As Richard sank back into his chair, broken and humbled, Jasmine took one last look around the room. The same place that had once felt like a cage now felt open, wide, alive. Her voice came again, soft but strong. "Maybe tonight we all learned something. That respect can't be bought. It's spoken, lived, and earned." And when the final clap faded, Jasmine turned and walked toward the exit head high. Hart unburdened, leaving behind not humiliation, but healing. A year passed, but the night at the Prestige Room never really left her. It lived quietly in the back of Jasmine's mind, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what grace could do when anger refused to take over. Life had changed in ways she once thought impossible. The girl who once carried trays now carried dreams, not for herself, but for others. She stood at the entrance of Columbia University, her name etched on a small bronze plaque beside the words Heal Program. It wasn't about prestige anymore. It was about purpose. Ace Week, She taught underprivileged students how to use language to rebuild confidence, how to turn pain into power. She called them her bridge builders because words, she told them, were how you crossed from despair to hope. Her mother, Angela, now walked slowly but proudly beside her. The illness had faded into remission, leaving only gentle gratitude in its place. Their small apartment in Manhattan was filled with sunlight, books, and the smell of coffee brewing a simple peace they once thought they'd never know again. Sometimes, Jasmine caught her mother watching her from across the table, smiling quietly, as if to say, "You did it, baby. You found your way home." On Wednesdays, another familiar face appeared in the classroom. Richard Blake, no longer the CEO in expensive suits, but a volunteer in rolled-up sleeves, stood at the whiteboard, teaching communication skills to ex-convicts. His voice was softer now, his words careful. During the first session, he had turned to Jasmine and said, "I used to think power was about being heard. Now I know real power listens first." She had nodded, not with triumph, but with forgiveness. The world had come full circle, not through revenge, but redemption. Every time she walked into that classroom, Jasmine felt something new, the quiet strength of having survived with her soul intact. One morning, as her students gathered around, she paused before starting her lesson. Her voice was gentle but clear. "Life can strip you of everything, your titles, your comfort, even your pride, but it can never silence what's inside your soul." And as sunlight poured through the tall windows, Jasmine smiled. For the first time in years, her world and her heart were finally at peace. From the night she was humiliated to the day she found her voice again, Jasmine's journey wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming her worth. She taught us that dignity cannot be bought, and that true power lies not in wealth or titles, but in compassion and courage. Her story reminds us that even in the coldest rooms, a kind heart can change the air we breathe. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Tell me what part stayed in your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Echoes, so more hearts can hear stories that heal. Thanks for listening.